Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Mysteries and Oddities video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here. This one yet again based on one of your newer suggestions. This one having to do with a fascinating case of a boy that was found somewhere in a forest that, for lack of a better term, was considered to be of feral existence. In other words, someone that was basically living his entire life out there in the forest until he was found. So when I was reading this information, it reminded me of another case that I talked about a couple of years back, and I'll include the link for it below. This one had to do with some children that were also found in a forest, and then they too in turn became a fascinating case of their own. They were known as the Green Children of Woolpit. If you haven't had a chance to check out the video, I'll include the link below. Check it out when you have a moment, and then you'll see some of the similarities between them. But for this one, let's go ahead and let's talk about this particular boy. He goes by one known name, at least a colloquialism of sorts. He was known as Peter the Wild Boy. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating information associated with this particular case. So here's how it goes. Apparently sometime in 1725, that's when this boy was found there in the forest, pretty much living out there in the woods of northern Germany near an area that's known as, today at least, Electorate of Hanover. And apparently he was found by some hunters that were just out there just randomly, I guess, doing some poaching or other things here and there, and then that's when they realized they came across him. And the way he was found was he was apparently eating some forest flora, so basically living off of the plant life out there. And for all intents and purposes, it seems like he had been living out there his entire life, at least up until that point. He was walking on all fours. He didn't have any kind of civilized manners or behaviors, couldn't even speak any known languages on our end. He was just someone that, again, was just randomly found out there, and for again, lack of a better term, seemed to be living an entire feral existence. Just like any other animal out there in the forest, there was this little boy there. His estimated age was around 12 years old, so that's the closest approximation as to his date of birth. That would have put him somewhere around 1713, considering the age or the time period that he was found afterward. What was interesting, though, was his case immediately took on a craziness there within both the Britain and the London area. There was a lot of curiosity around this boy and what he was doing. He became actually a commentary of sorts for a lot of prominent people out there, including Jonathan Swift. I'm sure you've heard that name if you've been in high school or in college here in the U.S., and then other prominent people also became interested in him. By far the most common, the most biggest one of all, though, was first was he came to the attention of the Princess of Wales, a lady by the name of Caroline of Angebach, and then later on, that's when eventually he became known to King George I. In fact, it was King George I that took this interest and then brought this boy to him, so that way he could inspect him more and then show him around his palace there at Kensington Palace. And for I don't know when or where, but eventually his name was eventually decreed as Peter. And then, of course, with him being someone found in the forest and having wild mannerisms, that's when he became known as Peter, the Wild Boy, afterward. But yes, his behaviors definitely took on a life of their own. A lot of people decided that they wanted to see more about him, study him more. He almost became known as a human pet, which is kind of like a bad term, of course, but that's how he became known there at the Kensington Palace. And these were some of the interesting characteristics associated with him and his behaviors. Apparently, he was someone that if there was a pocket watch nearby and it was striking the hours, he became fascinated by it. Also, he was someone that was constantly pickpocketing. Apparently, if people were around him, then he would find out, where something was valuable inside their, let's say, purse, or let's say inside their jacket, and then pickpocket them right then and there. He was even known to take on hats from people's staff, from Lord Chamberlain's staff, in other words, and then put them on, which of course created some sensation, but I imagine that he was let go as far as any kind of repercussions because of his nature, because people were again figuring out that this was someone that was just very, very unusual. But still, he had no speech. There was nothing else that people could discern as to where he came from, how he came to be in that forest, anything like that. To the day he died, pretty much this Peter the Wild Boy was never able to tell anyone because he never learned any speech whatsoever. This caused further, actually, speculation because those prominent people that were examining him began to question their own lineage, like their own type of culture, like they were establishing and thinking to themselves, what is religion? What distinguishes us as people from animals? If here you have an example of this boy, someone who apparently grew up with the animals, never having any human-like, quote unquote, human-like characteristics afterward. Still, people tried. The king himself tried to give him some kind of cultured mannerisms. They're trying to do him table manners. They also tried to get him to, of course, speak, and they tried to put him on with suits as well. In fact, there was at one point a green velvet suit that they would try to get him into, but he still hated clothing. He was not able to get those clothes and stay on, in other words, for a long manner. And in fact, at the end of each day, whenever instead of, let's say, going into a bed in his bedroom, he preferred actually to curl up right on the floor on the corner of his own very room. So that's where people would find him every single morning. And then, of course, that would just lead to those things happening as far as people saying that this is truly an animal and not, let's say, a little boy altogether. But eventually the king himself decided that he was not someone that was going to handle this boy afterward. And so in an almost benevolent manner, if you could call it, they decided to pay someone else, someone there at a Hertfordshire farm, to take care of this boy for the rest of his life. So rather than just throwing him out and letting him wander in the streets, they actually kind of took care of him, and they had someone else take care of him and make sure that he was handled well for the rest of his life. In fact, those farmers there were someone that could have treated him like someone in a circus. Have we seen some examples in the past of other people whenever they come across someone that they could just exploit? They put them in circuses and so on. No, in this case, this set of farmers, they made sure that they took care of him. They actually had a collar that was found on him to make sure that in case he got lost or he wandered out and he broke out, then if people found him, that collar would say where he was from and where to take him and so on. So it was a good indication, at least, of a kind thought to ensure that he was protected wherever he was. But eventually the boy died after a certain point. I couldn't quite discern the actual time period. I think it was actually, come to think of it now, I was reading somewhere, it was like late 1785 or so. So it goes to show he lived a pretty good lifetime out there, and then he was able to just basically be on his own in that time period. But eventually he died, and there was a real burial that was given to him. In fact, to this day, if you go to that location there, he's buried in an area known as North Church. That's where his grave is seen, and if you go there, people will still leave things associated with flowers and other remembrances, just to make sure that, yes, this is a boy that was a very, very unusual, but still someone that is remembered and commemorated to this day. In fact, you're looking at the actual gravestone itself. How about that? I love that kind of history because it's a great way to go to a location like this, read something that happened hundreds of years ago, but still, this is his burial. This is his real burial, and so that's a great way to visit some form of history altogether. But interestingly enough, though, examinations today have discerned this, that he may not have been a wild boy, in other words, a feral animal that was just randomly found. Instead, he suffered from another illness, something that was no chance of being diagnosed back then, but could be today. In fact, it was known now that he may have suffered from something called Pitt-Hopkins syndrome, and it all comes from one of the few remaining items that showcase him, like in other words, a painting that showcases his face and how he looked like, and that's apparently how people are discerning this syndrome to him. So it all has to do with this. He apparently had a very short stature, even for his age, at age 12. And then he had a very, very thick top set of curly hair. He had these hooded eyelids as well. And then his mouth was associated more as a cupid, like in other words, smaller, cupid related. And it had a very, very pronounced curve on the upper lip. And then everything else I mentioned earlier about him hating clothes, and then being able to get out of his clothes afterward, that's more associations with Pitt-Hopkins syndrome. And then other things as far as another unique trait that he had was he would hold acorns and other type of leaves in his hands just to make sure, again, that they were there in him always. Like, again, because I mentioned earlier, he was someone that was known as being eating forest floor all the time. And that's apparently another indication of the Pitt-Hopkins syndrome. But that's what he would would have been diagnosed if he was here today, alive in this world, as opposed to again be considered someone that was just a feral animal of sorts. But that's pretty much it. That's all the information associated with this very mysterious boy, Peter the Wild Boy, someone that again was found in a forest and then taken to some royal kingdoms, and then eventually is put into a farm and live out the rest of his life there. If anybody has any more information, anything else I might have missed, then please post those comments below. Anybody happen to have been by that grave too? What a great way to experience that kind of history again. His grave even says Peter the Wild Boy, and so it'd be fascinating to go there, and then I would love to be able to go there, do a live stream, take pictures and so on, and see that part of history there. So, all right, everybody, thanks again as always. Take care.